I want to tell you about the day I boarded the compact relay vessel Forth Passage as a detainee, and why I have not left it since. That requires some explanation of what a Varathi warrior is, what we are taught to believe about ourselves, and what I believed, specifically, on the morning of the 13th passage transit cycle, when a border guard put his hand on my shoulder and walked me off the deck of my own ship. A Varathi warrior is not a complicated thing. We are trained from the age of testing, 12 cycles, for most of us, to read a room the way a hunter reads ground. Weight distribution, exit angles, nearest weapon, nearest throat. We are taught that composure is the only form of power that cannot be taken from you. We are taught that recognition, the Varathi word is Veth Kale, which translates imperfectly as to be seen as worthy by one who is also worthy, is the highest thing one person can do for another. We earn it through conduct. We guard it carefully. We do not give it easily, and we do not perform it. I had given it to perhaps 11 people in my adult life: my weapons master, 3 members of my line squad, my mother once, near the end, a few others. I did not expect to give it, in any form, to a human technician aboard a compact processing vessel in the border corridor southeast of the Keth scatter. But I have found that the things I expected and the things that happened have very little in common. When I look back on that day, I will begin at the beginning. The border dispute was minor, by anyone's accounting. A Varathi patrol runner, my ship, the Vel Sorn, a 2-crew light vessel, had crossed the compact demarcation line by approximately 40 meters during a navigation correction. 40 meters. The automated boundary sensor flagged it before we had corrected back. The compact relay station at Keth 7 transmitted a detention order within 4 minutes. Standard procedure. I knew the procedure. My navigator, Doss, knew it. We had both read the compact transit manual the same week we were assigned to border patrol, because the compact manual is the kind of document that gets people killed when they haven't read it. We complied. We brought the Velsorns alongside the Orveth Passage, which had been vectoring toward our position, since the moment the sensor flagged us. Efficiently, I noticed, which told me the relay vessel's crew kept their intercept readiness at a level that most border vessels do not bother to maintain. I filed that observation away. Small observations are often the most accurate. A compact border officer came aboard the Velsorn with 2 assistants. He reviewed our navigation log, confirmed the incursion was unintentional and corrective in nature, and told me that standard protocol required a processing stamp and a crossed-species transit scan before the detention order could be cleared. The scan was routine. Every cross-species border crossing in the compact required one. It checked for contraband biological material, flagged quarantine violations, ran a species compatibility index for compact record-keeping purposes. I had been scanned at transit points 11 times in 6 years of border patrol. The process took approximately 20 minutes. I would be back on the Velsorn before the next meal cycle. That was what I expected. The border officer told Doss that the Velsorn would remain alongside, pending the stamp. He told me to follow him. I followed him across the boarding connector and onto the Orveth Passage. The ship was clean, I noticed. Not aggressively clean, the way compact inspection vessels sometimes are. Scrubbed to a sterility that announces itself, but quietly maintained. The corridor flooring had no scuff marks at the joined seams. The lighting panels were all at the same calibration. Someone aboard took maintenance seriously and did it without making a point of it. I noticed this because it is the kind of ship I would have kept if I had been assigned to keep a ship. The processing deck was midship, a long room with workstations along one wall and the scan apparatus at the far end, a standard compact Model 6 bloodline and biological scan frame, which I recognized from its profile. Wide aperture redundant sensor array, the kind of unit that gets installed on high transit vessels because the narrower models miss edge case flagging in mixed species environments. More thorough than a patrol runner needed, I thought. Appropriate for a relay vessel, though. There were 3 people in the room when I arrived. The border officer who had collected me, who then positioned himself near the door and did nothing else of note. A compact adjudicator, a Maravi, tall and translucent-skinned, with the layered administrative robes of a senior processing officer, who was seated at a workstation and did not look up when I entered. And the technician at the scan console. He was human. I knew humans existed. I had seen them at transit stations. I had read the Compact's integration files on the species, standard knowledge for a Border Patrol officer. Humans were a relatively recent addition to the Compact's recognized species registry, which meant their administrative presence in Compact infrastructure was still thin, patchy in some corridors, dense in others. Depending on the transit routes their colonies had colonized earliest. The Keth border corridor was one of the corridors where they had established an early presence, for reasons that had to do with the mining surveys of the 31st Compact cycle. I had read that too, because I read things I am supposed to read. I had not, in my reading, formed a clear picture of what a human looked like up close. He was shorter than I am. Most species are not shorter than I am. Varathi run tall, but he was notably so, perhaps 2/3 of my height, compact in the way that some species are compact without being small, built close to the ground, with a density that suggested the body had organized itself around being useful rather than impressive. His hair was brown going to gray at the temples, and the beard that covered the lower portion of his face was the same, darker brown at the center and gray at the edges. The skin of his hands, which were the first part of him, I could see clearly, because they were moving across the console in front of him, was weathered in the way that skin weathers when it has spent years in variable atmospheric conditions. Not damaged, but marked by time and use, the way good tools are marked. He did not look up when I entered either. Transit detainee, the border officer said, for processing and stamp. The human said, without looking up, "Give me one moment." His voice was low and even, not quiet in the way of someone being careful, just quiet in the way of someone who did not feel the need to project. The Maravi adjudicator at the workstation finally looked up at me. He looked at me the way Compact officials sometimes look at Varathi, an assessment that is trying to be professional and is not entirely succeeding. Varathi are large, and we have a reputation, some of it accurate, that makes certain administrative types recalibrate their body language when we enter a room. I stood and let him look. The human at the console tapped something twice, then turned around. He was older than I had initially estimated from the back of his head. Early 40s perhaps, with the kind of face that had settled into itself. Not handsome in the decorative sense, but organized, clear-eyed. He had a scar along the left jaw, old and well-healed, that vanished into the beard. His uniform was Compact standard issue for a technical specialist, navy and gray, no insignia beyond his rank patch and his station designation. He looked at me the way I had looked at him. A professional assessment, neither warm nor cold. Avra Kethsolan, he said, reading from the border officer's transmitted record. Varathi Patrol Runner, Velsorn, registered to the Keth Border Authority. Unintentional demarcation incursion, 40 meters corrected. Navigation log confirmed clean. He glanced at me directly. I'm callous. I'll run the scan. Shouldn't take long. I know the procedure, I said. Good, he said, and turned back to the console to begin the calibration sequence. I walked to the scan frame and stood in the position that the floor markings indicated. The Model 6 is a walk-in unit. No contact required, no physical sample, no restraint of any kind. You stand inside the aperture for 90 seconds, and the sensor array does the rest. I had done it 11 times. I stood with my hands at my sides and my eyes forward and waited. The scan began. I could feel the low harmonic of the sensor sweep. Varathi have a slightly broader perceptual range than many species, and the Model 6's sweep frequency sits at the edge of what I can detect as a vibration rather than a sound. It is not unpleasant. It is like standing in a light current of water. At 40 seconds, the console emitted a tone. I did not know what tone it was. I had not heard it before in a scan room. The border officer at the door shifted his weight. The Maravi adjudicator looked up from his workstation. The human, callous, did not make any visible motion, but I saw his hand stop on the console. He tapped something. The sweep continued for its remaining 50 seconds and ended. "Stay there a moment, please," Callus said. "What was the tone?" I asked. "Processing flag," he said. Which told me nothing, and which I suspected he knew told me nothing. I stayed where I was. He worked the console. Not rapidly, not with the performing urgency that people sometimes use when they want to communicate that something is serious, but methodically, the way a person works when they are following a procedure they know well and need to execute correctly. The Maravai had come to his feet at his workstation. The border officer had not moved but was watching the console now instead of watching me. "Callus," the Maravai said. "I know," Callus said. "Run the calibration verification first." "I am running it," Callus said. He did not look up or change his tone when he said this. He said it the way you say something to someone who has asked you to do a thing you were already doing. The calibration verification took 4 minutes. The room was quiet except for the sounds of the console and, at one point, the distant shift of the ship's atmospheric system cycling in the corridor outside. I stood in the scan frame and waited. A warrior learns to wait. You spend a great deal of your training learning that the space between knowing something has happened and understanding what has happened is not an emergency. You fill it with observation rather than with agitation. I observed that the Maravai was not comfortable. He was standing at his workstation with the posture of someone who wanted to be somewhere else and was not certain he had the authority to go there. I observed that Callus was, if anything, more settled than he had been before the tone. Whatever the tone had indicated, it had not made him anxious. That was interesting. I observed that my own pulse had not changed since the tone. I noted this with satisfaction. Then I noted that my observation of Callus had been more thorough than my observation of any of the other people in the room. I filed that away too. "Calibration confirmed nominal," Callus said. "Unit is reading correctly." "Then what is the flag?" the Maravai said. Callus pulled the display up on the main screen above the console so the room could see it. I could read compact standard notation well enough to understand the format. It was the same notation the Border Patrol manual used, but the specific codes on the screen were not transit codes. They were from a different section of the compact registry. I could read that they were significant. I could not read exactly what they said. "Bloodline index," Callus said, for the benefit of the room. "The scan has flagged a lineage match under the compact's ancestral records protocol. Specifically, under Article 7 of the Keth-Solon Bloodline Compact of the 31st cycle." He paused for exactly 1 second. "The Keth-Solon lineage flag." The Maravai said nothing. I said nothing, because I had no idea what the Keth-Solon Bloodline Compact of the 31st cycle was. I knew the Keth border corridor. I knew the name. Keth-Solon. It was in my family designation, which I had always understood to be a regional geographic indicator. The way many Varathi family names connected to the territories their lineages had historically patrolled. I had not known it was also in the Compact's bloodline registry. I had not known there was a compact bloodline registry for Varathi lineages at all. "That lineage is recorded as extinct," the Maravai said. His voice was very careful. "The scan disagrees," Callus said. "The scan is flagging a single individual. For a lineage flag to be active, there would need to be a match." Callus looked at the screen for a moment. Then he said, "There is a match." The Maravai walked from his workstation to the console and stood next to Callus and looked at the screen. I watched his face. The Maravai are not an expressive species, but there are things that cross every face regardless of species. The small collapse that happens when a person reads something they had hoped not to read. "That is impossible," the Maravai said. "The scan is running on a calibrated nominal unit," Callus said. "The match designation." The Maravai stopped. "I know what the match designation says," Callus said. "It's designating you." "I know," Callus said. There was a pause of approximately 3 seconds. In that pause, I became aware that something was happening in the room that I did not yet fully understand, and that my lack of understanding was a more significant problem than the incursion stamp I had come aboard this ship to obtain. "Someone explain to me," I said, "what the Keth-Solon bloodline compact of the 31st cycle is." Callus looked at me. The Maravai looked at Callus. "I'll explain it," Callus said. The Maravai said quickly, "That is the responsibility of the adjudicating officer aboard this vessel." "Then explain it," Callus said, still looking at me. The Maravai folded his hands in front of him, in a way that I recognized, from the compact administrative training materials, as a gesture of official preparation, the equivalent of clearing a throat before a formal statement. He said, "The Keth-Solon bloodline compact of the 31st cycle was a treaty clause negotiated between the Vorathi Keth-Solon lineage and the compact exploration authority at the time of the initial border surveys of the Keth scatter. It was a species integration compact, one of approximately 40 such compacts signed during the early survey period by various lineages of various species as part of the compact's effort to establish cross-species legal frameworks in newly charted territory." He paused. "The clause stipulated that in the event any future compact registry scan identified a living member of the Keth-Solon's lineage and a living compact registered individual of another species whose biological profile registered as a compatible match under the lineage's own hereditary criteria, the match would be recognized as a valid contractual bond under compact law, a binding personal compact between the two matched individuals, subject to confirmation by the scan's verification protocol." I listened to this. Then I said, "What does compatible match under hereditary criteria mean?" "It means," the Maravai said, with the tone of someone who very much wished he were somewhere else, "that the scan's biological analysis has assessed your physiological profile and the profile of the human technician, Rowan Callus, and determined that you are, by the Keth-Solon lineage's hereditary compatibility index as recorded in the compact's 31st cycle archives, a matched pair." I heard this. I stood in the scan frame and I heard it, and I looked at Rowan Callus. He was looking at the screen, not at me. He had the expression of a person reading a very complicated maintenance manual that he had not known existed until approximately 8 minutes ago. "A matched pair," I repeated, "under the lineage's criteria," the Maravai said, "which are binding under the compact clause that no one told me existed." "The compact clause," Maravai said carefully, "that the Keth-Solon lineage signed 3 centuries ago, which has been dormant in the compact registry since the lineage was recorded as extinct in the 89th cycle. Its existence in the registry was not concealed. It was simply not relevant. Until now." I stepped out of the scan frame. The border officer at the door straightened. I paid no attention to him. "And what does the clause actually require?" I said, "if the verification confirms the scan result?" The Maravai unfolded his hands and folded them again. "Under the clause's terms," he said, "a confirmed match constitutes a recognized compact bond. The compact is required to record and honor it as a legally binding agreement between the two parties, between me and the human technician, between you and technician Callus." Yes, I looked at Callus again. He had turned from the screen and was looking at me now. His expression had not changed substantially. He still had the quality of a man reading something. But now he was reading me, the way I had been reading him, with the same professional attention he had brought to the console. He did not look triumphant. He did not look frightened. He looked like he was waiting to see what I was going to do, in the way that a person who has done nothing wrong and is not particularly worried about what you are going to do can wait. "Are you aware," I said to him directly, "that this clause existed?" "No," he said. "I've been assigned to this vessel for 4 years. I've run approximately 800 transit scans. This is the first time I have ever heard that tone. But the tone is, you know what the tone is. It's in the technical documentation," he said. "I read the technical documentation." This, of all things, was the first moment I felt something shift inside my assessment of him. Not dramatically. A small recalibration. The answer was so plain and so unglamorous that it could not have been invented. "I see," I said. "I should tell you," he said. that the verification sequence is going to run whether anyone in this room wants it to or not. That's how the Model 6 is built. Once the Article 7 flag is triggered, the verification is automatic. It's designed that way so that the flag can't be suppressed by a single operator. He said this without any particular inflection, but he looked at the Maravai when he said the last sentence. The Maravai said, "Callus, I'm not doing anything," Callus said. "I'm informing a detained individual of the technical status of the scan that is being performed on her. That's in the protocol." The Maravai said, "The species integration compacts of the 31st cycle were written in a different political climate. There are strong grounds for a procedural objection to the activation of a dormant clause of this kind." "Probably," Callus said. "You'd want to file that with the compact legal authority at Keth 7. The verification will have completed before they respond." He turned back to the console. The Maravai stood very still for a moment. Then he walked back to his workstation and sat down and began, very deliberately, to type something. The border officer at the door had not moved. I had the impression he had decided that the safest position was exactly the one he was in, and intended to stay in it. I sat down in the single chair near to the scan frame, a plain utility chair, the kind that gets placed in scan rooms, because someone decided that detainees should be able to sit down during long processing procedures and did not give much thought to whether the chair was comfortable. It was not. I sat in it and thought. What I thought about was the word Veth-Kale. Recognition. The Varathi concept. To be seen as worthy by one who is also worthy. I had given it to 11 people. I had earned it from perhaps half that many. The Keth Solon bloodline compact was not Veth-Kale. It was a legal instrument, 300 cycles old, written by people who were now dust, predicated on a hereditary compatibility index that had been designed for a world in which humans did not exist as far as anyone in the Keth corridor knew. It was a contract. It was an administrative technicality. It had nothing to do with recognition. The scan finding us compatible was no different than a navigation computer finding two vectors parallel. It described a relationship between data points, not between people. I told myself this clearly and carefully. Then I looked at Rowan Callus, who was working his console. With the same quiet focus he had brought to every other task he had performed in my presence, who had read the technical documentation so that he would know what every tone in his equipment meant, who had, when everything in the room became suddenly and significantly more complicated, done nothing except continue to do his job with complete composure. And I recognized that I was going to have to revisit my assessment of what the word match meant. Not immediately, not yet, but I was going to have to revisit it. The door to the processing deck opened. Two people entered, a Varathi in the rust-brown uniform of a compact liaison attaché. The consul, I understood from the rank markings, assigned to the Orvith Passage as the Varathi authority representative on the border corridor, and a second Maravai, older than the adjudicator, in the white-banded robes of a senior compact administrator. The consul looked at me. He was Varathi, which meant I could read his expression with some accuracy. What I read was, "You have created a problem." "Avra Keth Solon," the consul said. "Consul Derev," I said, because I had read the personnel manifest for the Orvith Passage before crossing the demarcation line, because that was the kind of thing you read when you were the ranking officer on a border patrol runner. Consul Darev's expression adjusted. He had not expected me to know his name. "This situation," he said, "is being addressed." "What situation specifically?" I asked. "The detention, which I came aboard voluntarily, or the scan result, which I did not request?" "The scan result is the subject of a procedural review," the senior administrator said. He had a voice like a room being emptied. All the furniture of warmth and informality removed, bare floor visible. He looked at Callus. "Technician Callus, is the scanner unit's calibration log available for external review?" "It is," Callus said. "Calibration has already been verified nominal. I can transmit the log to any compact terminal you designate. There are technical questions, about whether a dormant clause of this kind should be triggered by a scan on a vessel not designated as a heritage registry station. The administrator said, I can look up the technical specification for Article 7 activation parameters, Callis said. The Model 6 documentation specifies that Article 7 activation is valid on any compact registered scanning unit rated for full-spectrum bloodline analysis. The Orvith Passages Model 6 is rated and registered. I can transmit that documentation as well. The clause itself may be subject to supersession under the species integration reforms of the 112th cycle, the administrator said. I'd want to read the 112th cycle reform language to confirm that, Callis said. Do you have the specific statute designation? The administrator looked at Callis, the way that senior administrators sometimes look at people who are not being obstructive, but who are, by the thorough and unhurried accuracy of their responses, making it very clear that obstruction is not going to be easy. I will need to consult the authority archive, the administrator said. Of course, Callis said. The verification sequence will complete in approximately 32 minutes. I'll have the documentation ready whenever you want to review it. Consul walked to where I was sitting. He lowered himself into a position that was not quite sitting, a Varathi formal stance that communicated both respect and urgency, used when the situation calls for speed but protocol requires recognition of rank. It is a stance I had seen senior officers use. It was more formal than I had expected him to use with me. The lineage designation, he said, quietly enough that the Maravai at the workstation could not hear clearly, carries implications that go beyond this vessel. I understand that, I said. The Keth-Sosan line was the border lineage of the Eastern Corridor, before the scatter surveys, before the compact. He looked at me steadily. There are people on T-Council who will contest this result regardless of what the scanner says. People on the Council, I said, do not have jurisdiction over a compact registered scanner's verification output. Darev looked at me for a moment. No, he said, they do not. Then their feelings about the result are noted, I said, but not decisive. Darev was quiet for a moment. He looked at Callis, who had his back to us and was working the console with no particular sign of interest in our conversation. The human, Darev said. What about him? He is a scan station technician. He is, I said. The Keth-Solan compact, if it holds, would designate him as the recognized mate of the lineage heir, which you appear to be, if the scan is accurate. The lineage's recognized compact partner, I said. Not mate. The 31st cycle language was not. I stopped because I realized I was correcting his terminology as if I had studied the clause, when in fact I had learned the clause's existence approximately 20 minutes ago and had absorbed its terminology from the adjudicator's recitation. But the terminology mattered. The distinction between a mate bond and a compact bond was significant. The first was personal. The second was, potentially, also personal. But it began as a legal and social recognition. The Varathi had both and did not confuse them. Regardless of terminology, Darev said, the implications of the designate. Consul, I said, and something in my voice stopped him. It was not volume. It was register. The register that a Varathi uses when they are about to say something that they intend to have heard. I have been aboard this vessel for approximately 90 minutes. I have not had an opportunity to read the clause in full. I have not spoken with the human technician about anything except the scan procedures. I have not made any decision about anything, because I have not had the information necessary to make any decision. All of that remains true. I paused. What is also true is that I am the person this scan was run on, and I am the person who will decide what I think about the result. Not the council, not you, not the senior administrator, me. Is that clear? Darev looked at me for a moment that was longer than was quite comfortable. Then he said, yes, that's clear. Good, I said. Then let the verification run. He stood and walked away from me to speak quietly with the senior administrator. I looked at the back of Rowan Callis's head and thought about the reading I had done. All of it, everything in every manual and transit file and patrol briefing, and how none of it had included a paragraph that began, In the event a scan flags your ancestral lineage as the extinct Keth Solon line and designates a human technician as your recognized compact partner, proceed as follows. Some things you cannot prepare for. You can only observe and decide. The 32 minutes of the verification sequence were not silent. They were filled, in segments, with the senior administrator's attempts to find a procedural basis to interrupt or delay the process, each of which Callus addressed from the console with the same unhurried precision. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He produced documentation references, statute numbers, technical specifications, compact protocol designations, with the reliability of a reference system that had been very carefully loaded and very carefully maintained. I watched him throughout this, because a Varathi warrior watches what she needs to understand, and I needed to understand him. The thing I was trying to determine was whether his composure was performed, whether it was the strategic calm of a person who knew they were winning and wanted to display their confidence, or whether it was something structural, something that came from further inside than strategy reaches. The difference matters to us. Performed composure is a kind of weapon. It communicates dominance. It says, I am not frightened of you because I know the outcome, and I am showing you that I know it, so that you will feel the distance between us. Warriors do this. Negotiators do this. It is a legitimate tactic, and I have used it myself. What Callus was doing was not this. He was not demonstrating composure for the benefit of the administrator. He was not looking at the administrator at all, most of the time. He was looking at his console, at his documentation, at the text he was reading from. When he spoke toward the console, toward the screen, as if the words were going into the record rather than into the room. When the administrator raised his voice, Callus did not adjust his volume or his posture. He waited for the administrator to finish and then continued from exactly where he had been. This is rarer than it sounds. Most people, when someone raises their voice in their direction, do something, become quieter, become louder, shift their weight, recalibrate their expression. The sound of a raised voice triggers a response in almost every living thing. The response is not always fear. Sometimes it is defiance or frustration, or the specific alertness of a person who expects to have to defend themselves. But something happens. In Callus, as far as I could observe, nothing happened. The administrator's raised voice was data. He received it, logged it, and continued the task he was performing. I had seen this quality once before, in my weapons master, who had spent 30 years in conditions where panic was the most dangerous thing in the room. She had trained it out of herself so thoroughly that it was no longer training. It was architecture. The calm was not something she chose. It was something she had become. I did not know Rowan Callus's history. I did not know how a human scan technician aboard a compact relay vessel in the Keth border corridor had come to have this quality. I knew only that he had it, and that it was real, and that watching it work in that room against the administrator's attempts to find a procedural lever was one of the more clarifying experiences I had had in several years of watching people operate under pressure. I listened to all of it. The administrator cited the Species Compatibility Taboo Statute, the provision in compact law that restricted formal cross-species compact bonds on the grounds of cultural interference. Callus looked up the statute, read the relevant section aloud, and noted that the taboo provision explicitly exempted bonds arising from pre-existing ancestral compact clauses that predated the taboo statute's enactment. The Keth Solon clause predated it by 67 cycles. The administrator cited a verification period protocol that allowed a senior officer to suspend automated sequences pending review. Callus read the protocol, agreed that the suspension power existed, and noted that the protocol required the suspending officer to demonstrate a specific procedural defect in the scan unit or the scan procedure, not a disputed outcome, but an actual defect. The administrator could not cite a defect because there was not one. The Varathi consul attempted a different angle. He argued, to the administrator, not to Callus, which was a choice I noticed. that the Kethsulun lineage's own cultural law required a lineage elder's ratification of any compact activation. Callas did not respond to this, because it was not a compact procedural point. The administrator did respond. He noted that the compact's Article 7 activation protocol was not subject to external cultural ratification requirements, because the compact clause itself, as signed by the lineage, had authorized the compact's own verification protocol as the sole activation mechanism. The Kethsulun lineage, 3 centuries ago, had agreed that the scan would be sufficient. The consul sat down. At the 20-minute mark, Callas turned from the console and looked at me. "You want water," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," I said, "because I did." He went to the supply panel near the door. The border officer stepped aside for him without being asked, and returned with a sealed field canteen of the type used on compact vessels for potable water. He held it out to me. I took it. He went back to the console. I drank the water and thought about that. The offering of water, the plainness of it. He had not asked if I was all right, which might have carried a patronizing implication. The assumption that I was not all right, that I needed reassurance, that the situation was overwhelming me. He had observed that I might be thirsty, because I had been standing in a scan frame for 90 seconds and sitting in a chair for 20 minutes in a warm room under stress, and he had provided water. It was the most functional possible version of the gesture, and it contained no performance whatsoever. The Varathi have a word for that kind of action. We say, Keth, which means, literally, the thing done because it is the right thing to do, with no expectation that it will be noted. It is different from a gift, which implies an exchange. It is different from a kindness, which implies an emotional motivation. It is closer to competence. The competence of treating another person's physical state as a fact to be addressed, the way you address any other fact in a room. I had given Keth to people. I had received it rarely, mostly from my weapons master and once from a medic who reset a dislocated shoulder in the field and said nothing except, "Move it slowly for 2 days." I noted that I was thinking about this. I noted that the fact I was thinking about this was itself something to observe. The verification sequence completed at 29 minutes and 40 seconds, slightly ahead of Callas's estimate. The console emitted a different tone, sustained and clear, 2 notes in sequence, which I had also never heard in a scan room, but which I understood immediately to be the sound of a definitive result. The room went very still. Callas read the output. He read it without expression for approximately 10 seconds. Then he said to the room, "Verification complete. Result confirmed. Article 7 activation validated under Compact Protocol 7G. The Kethsulun lineage match is formally recorded." He paused. "I'll transmit the record to the Compact archive at Keth 7 immediately. Standard notification goes to both parties and to the Compact's legal authorities simultaneously." Another pause. "That's the protocol." The senior administrator stood with his hands at his sides. He was looking at the screen above the console, where the verification output was displayed. His face had the quality I had seen on the adjudicator's face earlier, the small collapse. "There are appeal mechanisms," the administrator said. "There are," Callas agreed. "The legal authority at Keth 7 can advise on those. I'll include the relevant contact information in the notification." The administrator looked at me. "Avra Kethsulun. The Compact acknowledges that this outcome was not anticipated by either party. You will have full access to the Compact's legal counsel regarding." "Thank you," I said. He stopped. "I understand there are appeal mechanisms," I said. "I will read the clause in full before deciding whether I intend to use them. I will do that when I have a copy of the clause." Callas, without being asked, brought a copy of the clause up on the small terminal nearest my chair and turned the screen toward me. I looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," I said, for the second time in 2 minutes, which was an unusual frequency for me. He nodded once and went back to completing the transmission protocol. The administrator and the Meravai adjudicator both departed the processing deck within a few minutes of each other. The administrator to send his own report, I assumed. And the adjudicator, because there was nothing left for him to administer. The border officer remained at the door. Consul Darev remained in the room, at his workstation, working on something I could not see. He did not speak to me again. He had said what he came to say. I read the clause. It was 23 paragraphs of archaic compact legal notation, which I read twice, the first time for general comprehension, and the second time for precise understanding. The language of 300 cycles ago was direct in some respects and obscure in others. What it said, stripped to its essence, was this. The Keth-Solon lineage had agreed, in exchange for survey rights and border patrol recognition in the Eastern Corridor, to participate in the Compact's species integration framework by accepting a compatibility compact with any compact-registered individual of another species whom a future scanner designated as a hereditary match. The compact, once activated by verified scan, was recognized as a formal bond, not a marriage contract precisely, but something with overlapping functions. It conveyed legal status, mutual recognition under compact law, and specific rights and protections to both parties. It could be dissolved by mutual agreement, or by a formal legal proceeding before the compact's authority. It could not be voided unilaterally by a third party, not by a consul, not by an administrator, not by a council. The lineage had given the compact their word. The compact had taken it and put it in the registry. The scanner had found the word still true. I set the clause aside. I looked at Rowan Callis. He had finished the transmission protocol and was now doing something with the scanner units. Maintenance log, a routine post-scan record, I gathered, the kind of administrative task that existed at the end of every scan regardless of what the scan had found. He was doing it with the same attention he had brought to everything else. I thought about the 11 people to whom I had given Veth, Kale. I thought about what I had said to Consul Darev, that I was the person who would decide what I thought about the result. I thought about the word Keth. I thought about a man who read the technical documentation so that he would know what every tone in his equipment meant. I did not make any decision. I was not ready to make any decision. What I was ready to do was observe, precisely and without rushing, the thing that had happened in this room. The consul left at the end of the duty period, with a look in my direction that I interpreted as, "This conversation is not finished, but I am choosing to have it elsewhere." I did not stop him. The border officer was relieved by a second officer at the change of watch. The room was quiet. The ship hummed around us. The steady mechanical breath of a vessel in transit, the particular resonance of a well-maintained hull moving through space at a speed designed for endurance rather than urgency. Callis finished the maintenance log. He saved it, transmitted it to the vessel's system archive, and sat back from the console. For a moment he did not do anything, just sat, with his hands resting on the console's edge, and looked at the dark screen where the verification output had been. Then he turned to me. "I should tell you something," he said. "All right," I said. He looked at me directly, the same level, professional clarity he had used throughout. "I don't actually know what any of this means for you. I know what the clause says. I know what the verification confirmed. I know what the compact will record." He paused. "I don't know if that's what you want." I heard the words, all of them, and the space around them. A man who had just been designated, by the law of my own lineage's ancient word and the compact's own scanner, as the recognized compact partner of a warrior-born heir to an extinct Varathi lineage. A man who had not asked for this, had not sought it, had not performed his way through the last several hours with an eye toward the outcome, who had simply done his job, read his documentation, told the truth to the administrators who would rather he had not, given water when water was needed. And then, when everything was decided and the room was finally quiet, ask not, "What happens next?" or, "What does this make us?" but, "Is this what you want?" The Varathi word, Veth Kale, is not a word you say aloud when you give it. Recognition, in our tradition, is not announced. It is demonstrated. It lives in conduct, not in declaration. But I will tell you what it felt like in that quiet processing deck, in the hum of a well-maintained ship, when I understood what he had asked and why he had asked it. It felt like the only honest moment in a day full of procedures. "The clause is binding," I said, carefully. "Yes," he said. "But binding doesn't mean. I know what binding means legally. I'm asking something else." "I know what you're asking," I said. He waited. He was very good at waiting. "I haven't decided what I think yet," I said, "about any of it." "That's fair," he said. "I haven't either. But I want to read the clause again," I said. "All of it, including the provisions about what the compact partner's rights are. Not as an heir, not as the compact record." I looked at him steadily. What a specific person's rights are, in relation to another specific person. Something shifted in his face, not dramatically, a small recalibration. The same kind I had felt in my own assessment of him when he said he had read the technical documentation, recognition moving somewhere behind his eyes. "I can send the full clause archive to any terminal you designate," he said. "Send it to mine," I said, "on the Velsorn." "All right, and?" I stopped. "And," he said, "it is not easy after a lifetime of Keth and Vethkel, and the careful governance of what you give and to whom, to say the thing that is simply true without dressing it in procedure. I am a warrior. I am trained in precision. But some forms of precision are not tactical. They are just accurate." "The water," I said, "that was good. What you did, the way you did it." He looked at me for a moment. "You were thirsty," he said. "Yes," I said, "and you noticed. And you did something about it, without making anything out of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been on this vessel for 4 years. A lot of people come through that scan frame. Most of them are tired or frightened or angry. Water doesn't fix any of that, but it's something you can do. It's Keth," I said. "In Varathi." "What does that mean?" "The thing done because it's the right thing to do," I said, with no expectation that it will be noted. He was quiet for a few seconds. "I didn't know that word." "Now you do," I said. He looked at the console and then back at me, and there was something in his face in that moment. Not the professional assessment from earlier, not the focused attention he brought to documentation and procedure, but something quieter and more unguarded, the look of a person who has heard something true and is holding it carefully to keep it from breaking. "I'll send the clause archive," he said. "Thank you," I said. For the 3rd time. A new record. I stood. The border officer at the door, a different officer from the one who had been there at the beginning of the watch, straightened. I looked at him and then to Callis. "Is there a process I need to complete?" I said, "before I return to the Velsorn?" "The stamp, the detention record." Callis checked his console. "The Article 7 activation supersedes the original detention order under compact protocol. The incursion record is flagged as resolved and linked to the match documentation. The stamp is automatic." He looked up. "You're clear to return to your vessel." "Good," I said. I walked toward the door. The border officer opened it. I stopped in the doorway. "Callis," I said. "Yes. The clause will be read by people who have strong opinions about what it means and what should be done about it. The consul, the council, the compact legal authority. All of them?" "I know," he said. "They will have those opinions," I said, "regardless of ours, and they will act on those opinions through whatever channels they have access to." "Probably," he said. "So I want to be clear," I said, "about what I intend to do, which is to read the clause fully, to consult with no one whose opinion I have not already decided to trust, and then to make a decision based on what I think, not on what anyone else would prefer." He was looking at me steadily. "That sounds right," he said. "It is right," I said. "And when I have made that decision, I intend to communicate it directly to you. Not to the compact archive, not to the consul, to you." A pause, long enough to be deliberate. "I'll be here," he said. I looked at him for one more moment. I was not performing anything. I was not conveying anything that I had not decided to convey. I was doing the thing that Varathi do when they are about to acknowledge something significant. I was looking directly at it, without flinching and without hurry. I know, I said. That's one of the things I've noted. I went back to the Velsorn. Doss was at the nav console when I boarded, with the expression of a person who had been waiting with disciplined patience for approximately 3 hours and was very interested in knowing what had happened. I told him, precisely and in order, everything that had occurred. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the reasons I had requested him as my navigator. He understood that the first complete account of a thing was more useful than a series of partial accounts interrupted by questions. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The Kethsolun lineage." "Apparently," I said. "Your family designation," he said. "Kethsolun. You always said it was geographic." "It is geographic," I said. "It is also, apparently, hereditary and registered." Doss was quiet again, and the human. "He is a scan technician," I said. "Early 40s, brown-gray hair. Reads the technical documentation." Doss looked at me for a moment. "You're going to file a review request," he said. It was not a question. He was offering me a way to frame the situation that I had not yet chosen. "No," I said. He absorbed this. "You're going to read the clause." "I've already read it once," I said. "I intend to read it again. And then, I said, "I'm going to decide what I think." Sus looked at the navigation console, and then out the forward port at the side of the Orvith passage, its hull dark and clean against the scatter's background field. "He gave you water," he said. I looked at him. "How did you know that?" "Because you mentioned that he noticed you were thirsty," Doss said. "And you don't mention things like that unless they mattered." I did not answer this because Doss was correct and did not need me to confirm it. I read the clause 3 more times over the following 2 days. I read everything in the compact archive that was adjacent to it. The original survey agreements, the integration frameworks of the 31st cycle, the subsequent species integration reforms that the senior administrator had cited, which I confirmed, as Callis had implied, did not supersede the clause. I read the compact legal authority's public records of prior Article 7 activations, of which there had been 7 in the compact's history. None in the last 80 cycles, none involving a human. Then I did the thing I had told Callis I would do. I made a decision based on what I thought. I contacted Callis directly through the compact relay station's personnel system, which allowed intervessel communication between registered individuals. The connection opened cleanly. He was at a terminal. I could see the edge of the console behind him, in what appeared to be a personal quarters, rather than the processing deck. "Evra Kethsolun," he said. He did not seem surprised that I had called. "I've read the clause," I said. "All of the relevant context." "All right," he said. "I have also," I said, "thought about what I observed in that room, over the course of the last 2 days, carefully." "I'd expect that," he said. "I want to tell you what I think," I said. "Not what the clause says, not what the compact records, what I think." "Go ahead," he said. I told him. It took longer than I had expected, because the things that were true were specific, and I did not want to be imprecise about them. I told him what Veth Kale meant, fully, not the abbreviated version I had referenced in the scan room. I told him what Keth meant, and why I had named it when I did. I told him what I had observed about him in the course of approximately 4 hours. His preparation, his composure, his precision, the absence of performance in anything he did, the question he had asked when the room was finally quiet, and the answer was already decided, and he had chosen to ask about what she wanted, rather, than what would happen next. I told him that the clause was binding, and that I had decided I was not going to contest it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you something." "All right," I said. "I've also been thinking," he said, "for 2 days, about the room, about what happened." He looked at me steadily through the terminal screen. "I know the clause is binding. I'm not. I want to be clear about something. The reason I'm not contesting it is not because it's binding." I held very still. "The reason," he said, "is that I read the clause too. All of it. And then I thought about what it would mean, not legally, what it would actually mean. For 2 people, one of them a Varathi warrior who reads personal, manifest, before she crosses a borderline and corrects the consul's terminology, says, "Thank you," 3 times in one afternoon when she has, I suspect, said it rarely in her life. He paused, and I thought that the word that clause uses, recognized, is a word I can stand behind, if you can. Recognized. The compact's word for it, not Veth Kale. Not our word, not the weighted Varathi tradition with its centuries of meaning, but a word that describes the same movement, the same act, being seen, choosing to see. I can stand behind it, I said. Then that's what I needed to know, he said. The compact seal confirmation was filed with the compact legal authority at Keth 748 hours later by mutual declaration, which the clause permitted and which bypassed the standard review period by mutual agreement. Consul Darev filed 2 objections. The senior administrator filed 1. The compact legal authority reviewed all 3 objections against the clauses, terms, and the verification record, and dismissed them. The record was sealed. I am told that there are people on the Varathi Council who are still unhappy about this. I am told that the compact legal authority has received inquiries from several administrative offices requesting clarification on the Article 7 protocol. I am told that the Orvith Passages scan unit has been flagged for an external technical audit, which it will pass without difficulty, because there is nothing wrong with it, and Rowan Callis's maintenance records are impeccable. None of this surprises me. The people who were in that room when the tone sounded spent a great deal of time and effort trying to find a procedure that would undo what the scan found. They did not find one because there was not one to find, and because the human at the console knew the documentation better than they did. He had read it. He had read all of it, not because he had anticipated this moment, but because reading the documentation was what you did when the documentation was your responsibility. That is still the thing when I try to explain it to people that they find hardest to understand. They want the story to be about the scan result, about the ancient clause, about the legal contest. They want the thing that changed everything to be the thing that was dramatic. But the thing that changed everything, for me, specifically, in that room, was not the tone. It was not the verification output. It was not even the question he asked when the room was finally quiet, though that question mattered. It was the water. The field canteen held out without ceremony. The plain recognition of a fact that a person in a warm room under stress might be thirsty, and the immediate, uncommented upon addressing of that fact. Keth. The thing done because it is the right thing to do, with no expectation that it will be noted. I noted it. I am Avra Keth Solon. I am a warrior. I have given. Veth. Kale. To 11 people in my adult life. I guard it carefully. I do not give it easily, and I do not perform it. I gave it to a human technician who read the manual, told the truth to people who wished he hadn't, and brought me water without making anything out of it. His name is Rowan Callis. He has been on the Orvith Passage for 4 years. As of the sealed confirmation, he will be there somewhat longer, or I will be there with him, which amounts to the same change in the record. The compact uses the word recognized. I use Veth Kale. They mean the same thing. That is all I have to say about it.